My last 3 videos describe 30 mistakes I made and things that broke on Sea Change, my Pacific Seacraft 34 that I sailed alone around the world. But some sailors were less fortunate than me while sailing the South Pacific, Indian and Atlantic Oceans and the Caribbean in the time span I was involved. And here are 30 stories I had, or felt, some connection with, in roughly chronological order. Richard Carr disappeared on his Pacific passage. The first story is one of the more unusual and dates to 2017, before I bought Sea Change, but it was documented in a remarkable account by Ali Carr Troxwell in November 2018 in Outside magazine, just before I retired and started my search for a boat to sail around the world. The story of her father, Richard Carr, was rather similar to mine, a retired professional who had long dreamed of sailing around the world, but whose wife, Martha Carr, was not keen on crossing oceans. He set off alone from California in his 1985 Union 36 cutter called Celebration, a boat similar to Sea Change, albeit with a full keel. But midway to the Marquesas in French Polynesia, he started sending strange messages about pirates attacking his boat, which eventually ended with no contact, no EPIRB or other emergency alert, and no trace of him or Celebration has been found. Attacks on anchored sailboats at Nombre de Dios in Panama. I made 2 shakedown sails from Panama to the San Blas Islands, a 40-mile coastal passage, with Christina in November 2019 and again with Christina and Erica in November 2021. I was strongly warned not to stop at the bay at the in-between village of Nombre de Dios, as there were 2 attacks on anchored sailboats there in 2019 alone. In July 2019, a German couple, Mario and Nina, were held at gunpoint by 6 men who boarded their Beneteau 46 called Sea Tramp and ransacked it, Nina barely escaping a sexual assault. With help from a GoFundMe that raised $8,000, they were able to continue all the way to the Society Islands in French Polynesia before selling their boat and returning to Europe in late 2021. Their YouTube channel had 8,000 subscribers and 189 enjoyable videos if you understand German, and there are subtitles. A link is in the description. Then, in early November 2019, 8 men boarded a sailboat carrying 6 Norwegians, 4 men and 2 women, that had anchored in that bay. They ransacked the boat and sexually assaulted the women. Eventually 4 of these assailants were sentenced to 20 years in jail. I do not know the fate of their voyage. Blue Beryl dismasted during Pacific Passage. While I was sailing the 4,000 miles from Panama to the Marquesas in 2022, a steel Koopmans 44 Dutch boat named Blue Beryl, with Alex and Yvette on board, was dismasted roughly halfway across, apparently due to a broken backstay despite it being a completely new rig a couple of years earlier. Several passing boats responded, including Ian and Anne on Afriki and Manuel and Vanessa on Good Karma, who each told me the tale in Taiohae Bay and Hakahau Bay respectively. They rendezvoused with Blue Beryl and transferred diesel and food. Ian and Anne described this with video footage in a YouTube video about their Pacific Passage, and this screenshot from it shows Blue Beryl with just 1 sail in their jury rig. A link is in the description. In episode 248 of Parlay Revival on YouTube, Colin McRae interviews them, including footage from them, again a link in the description. They added several sails to their jury rig and took 26 days of miserable rolling, doing 2 to 4 knots for the remaining 2,200 miles to Hiva Oa, arriving shortly after I left Nuku Hiva. They rigged a temporary mast for the 800-mile sail from the Marquesas to Tahiti, and their insurance with Pantaenius yielded a new Selden mast delivered from Germany to Tahiti. By the time I finally met them in Naiafu in Tonga in 2023, they were back to normal, albeit the GoFundMe that was set up for them featuring this picture only raised $3,000 of the $30,000 they were out of pocket. Their latest YouTube video suggests they are now in Vanuatu. Other dismastings on the Pacific Passage. Over the last 5 years, I'm aware of at least 3 other dismastings on this long passage from the Americas to French Polynesia, with 3 different outcomes. In March 2023, a family of 5, roughly 900 miles out of Mexico on their West Sail 43 named Mini Wahuni, were dismasted in rough conditions. A nearby ship rescued the mother and 3 children, but the father, Travis Nicolet, fought his way back to Mexico and succeeded with assistance from numerous other sailboats passing that way. Once again, Colin McRae made a YouTube video about it, link in description. In October 2023, a Bavaria 44 named Yara was dismasted just north of the equator, and the 3 crew on board were rescued by James on break of dawn, who remarkably was sailing back eastwards to Panama, documented on his YouTube channel called Sailing Zingaroo. Apparently, they were unable to build a jury rig and decided to abandon the vessel. However, they did not scuttle it, and months later it was discovered adrift by another sailboat. And here is what James had to say about that. Most recently, in March 2025, a solo sailor named John Jones, on his way from El Salvador on his Taiohae 37 named Quiet, was dismasted, yet he managed to sail on to French Polynesia under jury rig, with fuel assistance from a passing ship, despite struggling to cross the doldrums, and according to his tracker, is now in Tonga. 3 boats with broken booms in Taiohae Bay. While I was in the bay on Nukuhiva for a total of 2 weeks after the Pacific Passage, 3 boats arrived with broken booms. In each case, they had gotten caught with full main up in a squall, and the boom had broken at the attachment point for the vang. One repaired the boom in Taiohae Bay by inserting a wooden spar to splice it. Another had an aluminum sleeve manufactured to fit over the break, while a third had a new boom shipped from Europe via Tahiti. I was glad that I did not have a vang. Instead, I used a triangular combination of preventer from the middle shroud chainplate, the main sheet and traveller, and the topping lift to keep the boom from moving when on a broad reach, as we were most of the passage. Stefan Raymond murdered in Hakahau Bay. In October 2011, this German, who was sailing with his partner Heike Dorsch on their 46-foot aluminum catamaran called Baju, was killed by a local goat hunter acting as his hunting guide. The motivations remain obscure, but the finding of his burnt remains at a campfire fed rumors of cannibalism, something that in the distant past appears to have been a reality on these islands. The perpetrator, Arihano or Henry Haiti, later assaulted Heike, but then fled and was on the lam with help from locals for 2 months. He eventually turned himself in and was sentenced to 28 years in jail, first in France and now in Tahiti. Heike Dorsch returned to Germany and wrote a book about her experience and even participated in a TV movie about it. And a journalist wrote the most detailed account I have seen in English, published in GQ, link in the description. While I was in the bay in 2022, in addition to hiking to the same Waipo waterfall and eating in the same tiny village of Hakahau as they did, we had several social meetups, including a barbecue on the beach, an evening on a large catamaran called Flight Deck, and 2 gatherings on Sea Change. At one point, a large catamaran arrived, but the single chap on it remained out of sight behind closed curtains and did not join these events. Eventually, I went over and met him, an Austrian named Robert, and he explained that he was best friends with Stefan and now, on his own sailing adventure, had come to the bay to see where his friend had died. Rain dancer sunk after hitting whale in the South Pacific. While I was recovering from left shoulder rotator cuff surgery at home in Illinois in March 2023, There were news reports of a 44-foot sailboat named Rain Dancer being sunk by a whale strike midway between the Galapagos and French Polynesia. The boat sank within 15 minutes, and the crew of 4 abandoned ship to their life raft and dinghy, carrying VHF radios and satellite communication equipment with them, and managed to contact a friend on another sailboat called Rolling Stones behind them, and were picked up after just 10 hours and taken on to French Polynesia. There were several incidents of whale strikes in the South Pacific that season. In Wonder Point Marina, when I got there in October 2023, I met a solo French sailor named Patrick, whose racing-style Sunfast 3600 named Orion was hit several times by a humpback whale between Tonga and Fiji, bending his starboard rudder, which in this picture he had removed for repair, and bashing a hole in the port bow that he managed to isolate with a bulkhead, and here had repaired. I had several close interactions with humpback whales at Niue and in Tonga, but was fortunate not to hit any or be hit by any. Russian inflatable catamaran sunk off Australia. When I was in Wonder Point Marina in August 2023, preparing for my second season, there was a most unusual boat there, an inflatable catamaran with a Russian crew who were attempting to sail around the world on an inflatable multi-hull, a project called the Russian Way Expedition. Their initial trimaran sank near Easter Island, and after their rescue they were donated this inflatable catamaran, but it in turn sank off the coast of Queensland later that season, apparently having had holes bitten in the hulls by cookie-cutter sharks. They were rescued again and donated a regular monohull with which they completed their circumnavigation. Dance Me dismasted near Tonga. When I was in Nayafu in Tonga in September 2023, a dismasted, gorgeous blue boat arrived called Dance Me. I had helped Jean Socrates get her dinghy launched that day, and she offered to buy me dinner. We stopped to talk to the crew, Hans and Lisbeth, and persuaded them to join us, and we joined the 10 Danes on Velodia at the Crocodile restaurant. Hans and Lisbeth are in the front, with Jean behind Lisbeth. It turned out that a chain plate that was original to their 14-year-old boat had broken about 200 miles east of Tonga during a maramu that I was sheltering from in Naiofu, and which had battered Jean Socrates on the radar. In the same episode of Parlay Revival as the Blue Beryl interview, Colin McRae interviewed, and then along with Alex of Blue Beryl, shown here in a screenshot, helped Hans and Lisbeth set up a jury rig for the 500-mile sail to Fiji for a mast replacement the next season. Another screenshot of them celebrating the jury rig. Colin reveals why the chain plate broke, a combination of poor design and under-strength build. Insurance from Pantaneous replaced the rig in Fiji, and they are now rounding South Africa. Another dismasted boat arrives in Nayafu. Another dismasted boat arrived, whose name I unfortunately did not photograph or note in my blog. The older chap and his partner on board were clearly distraught and not very communicative, except that they said a chain plate had broken, and I recall they had no insurance, so I don't know what happened to them. Except that they suffered another loss the evening of our dinner party, when their dinghy disappeared and they appealed to Lars from Seawind, who was giving me a tow back to Sea Change after my outboard had quit while returning Jean Socrates to Nareda. Lars eventually found their dinghy on the other side of the bay and returned it to their great relief, presumably having not tied it on well. Boardings and thefts in Savu Savu. After Tonga in 2023, I sailed back to Fiji, again checking in at Savu Savu, at the Waitui marina that has only moorings, and was put on one behind this monster home-built catamaran from England called Skedaddle. The couple on board were not very friendly, so I did not get to know them. However, I had a good fortune to befriend Hawaiians Ed and Fran McLaughlin on the boat moored in front of them, Aka, who helped me a lot going forward. I did not notice anything amiss the night before I left on October the 8th, but later on the VHF radio overheard the chap on skedaddle repeatedly call for the police as he had driven off a man who had swum to his boat and climbed on board. Later I heard from Ed and Fran that they had a few items stolen from their dinghy that night, and a year later at Thursday Island I heard from Boren and Lisa on Nakika that they too had chased off a guy swimming up to their boat that evening. Sadly, there have also been other reports of boardings and thefts in that mooring field at Savu Savu, an otherwise pleasant town, which only increases the attractiveness of the fancy new marina called Nawi that was carved out of a nearby island. Boat sailing from Fiji to New Zealand breaks mast, killing skipper and injuring crew. Later, in September 2023, when I was in Vunda Point Marina on the western side of Fiji, a sad report came in of a New Zealand boat called Second Life on passage to New Zealand, which had a tragic accident in which the top third of the mast broke off and hit the deck, killing the skipper, Clive Nothling, and injuring the two crew. A nearby cruise ship rescued the most seriously injured crew member, and Fiji patrol boats rescued the other and recovered the body of the skipper. There is no information on the fate of the yacht. Andioma lost at sea. In early October 23, a 1975 Islander 36 named Andioma, with her crew of Dave and Maureen Trumbull, left Naiafu in Tonga for the passage to New Zealand. This Facebook post on Boatwatch later that month asked for help finding them, but despite a search by the New Zealand authorities, no trace of them or Andioma was found, and they were presumed lost at sea. Frenchmen rescued from boat in remnants of Cyclone Lola. In late October 2023, I cut short my cruise through the Osawa Islands on the western side of Fiji when the first cyclone of the South Pacific season formed up north in the Solomon Islands, because some models predicted it would head southeast towards Fiji, and so I sailed down to Vunda Point Marina. As it turned out, Cyclone Lola meandered roughly south, causing lots of damage in Vanuatu, and then petered out below New Caledonia. However, its remnants then merged with a low coming off Australia, and the combination was forecast to generate a strong storm off the north of New Zealand with 50-knot winds. By now there were several boats making the passage south to New Zealand, and while most avoided the storm, an unfortunate and, as far as I know, unnamed solo French sailor on his small boat named Juan Sabulan got caught in it and was rescued by the New Zealand authorities. This image from the rescue helicopter shows his shredded sails, and the streaks on the sea indicate the very strong winds. His boat was abandoned. These three are just a few of many harrowing incidents on this often difficult passage between Tonga, Fiji, New Caledonia or Vanuatu, and New Zealand, or back north again. Another awful one occurred in October 2019, the month I bought Sea Change, when a 2000 Beneteau 47 named Essence with 4 crew sank in stormy conditions only miles from Opua, because a wave hit them that broke the cabin windows and swamped the boat. The wave also took their life raft, so they jumped into the water and were eventually dropped a life raft by a New Zealand Air Force Orion. But only the 2 crew managed to get into it, the owner and his wife hanging on in the water. A rescue helicopter winched them all on board, but the owner, Stuart Peterson, was dead. There is a detailed account in Yachting Monthly from September 2021, link in the description. Thursday's child lost on Navutu Reef in Fiji. When I arrived in Opua at the end of my second season in November 2023, I spent a first evening there at a reception at their yacht club, chatting with John Socrates on the radar and Ray and Debbie and their daughter Donna on Thursday's child, a gorgeous outbound 46. In May 2024, as I was about to leave Opua for the passage to New Caledonia, the last person I chatted with was Ray, and they then sailed to Fiji. Sadly, they had a navigational failure and ran up on Navutu Reef. This image is from the boat who rescued them, called Second Set, but Thursday's child was lost. Navutu Reef is in the middle of what appears otherwise to be a wide-open channel between the Moala Islands in the west and the Lau Group in the east, on the way north to the check-in port of Savu-Savu. The reef is shown clearly in my iSailor chart, but on the popular Navionics charts they probably were using, this reef only appears if you zoom in enough, and you have no way of knowing how far you have to zoom in to see it. These two images from a thread on crew.org.nz show how the reef only appears when you zoom in enough in Navionics. My PredictWind tracker had a feature allowing one to track other boats, and I was following them, hence this image from that fateful day, May 27, 2024. They subsequently purchased a Milo 46 in Fiji and continued cruising. Hitting reefs in Fiji is not uncommon. Indeed, when I was sailing from Savu-Savu across to Viti Levu and stopped at Namina Island in October 2023, my friends Kent and Michelle on Jack Iron, shown here sailing into Savu-Savu and here at anchor at Namina, who were motoring to Vunda Point Marina because they had torn both their main and genoa and shipped them from Savu-Savu to Vunda for repair, attempted a shortcut directly west, but ran up on a reef in this complicated reef system while following a Navionics track. But fortunately, they managed to back off it without much damage. The next day, they took the deep open Vatu Ira channel to the south of it instead, which I followed a few days later after visiting Makongai Island. The impressive Utruma catamaran called Great Circle, whose YouTube channel I followed regularly as they were a few months ahead of me all the way around the world, hit a reef in the complex of islands called Vanuatu in Fiji with one of their rudders, causing serious damage inside the hull. Link to their YouTube video in the description. I witnessed several boats that had been lost on reefs, like this boat called Ratafia, that hit the windward reef of Maupiha in the Leeward Islands of French Polynesia and was torn apart and then dragged by tractor to the only remaining family homestead on the atoll, but I've been unable to find any information online about it. I had a rather distant connection to an ocean racing boat called Vestas that during the 2014 Volvo Ocean Race ran up on the reef at Corgadas Carajos Shoals in the South Indian Ocean at full speed at night. The folks who run the Navily app for anchorages and marinas cheekily put an anchorage marker at that spot with 1 star and this description. When I visited 10 years later in October 2024, I left my more sensible anchorage marker on the western sandy side with this more detailed description. Cruising couple killed in the Caribbean. In a terrible incident that gained worldwide attention in February 2024, an American couple, Ralph Hendry and Kathy Brandell, both around my age, were anchored off Grenada when their Cape St. Francis catamaran called Simplicity was boarded and hijacked by 3 escaped convicts who forced them to sail north towards St. Vincent before throwing them overboard. The 3 culprits were given effective life sentences. A GoFundMe raised $78,000 for their respective 2 sons to help cope with the aftermath. I anchored off Grenada and sailed the same route in May 2025, and it was hard to imagine this tragedy happening there. Crocodile kills sailor in Hinchinbrook Channel on Queensland coast. In mid-July 2024, I was sailing up the northeast coast to Queensland, and to avoid strong conditions offshore, I stopped for a night in the Hinchinbrook Channel, off a little island called Haycock Island. It was a peaceful night and morning, but I had heard the sad story from 2021 when a sailor named Andrew Hurd went fishing up one of the nearby channels north of the anchorage, which you can see some of in this satellite view, and did not return. His damaged dinghy was found the next morning, and it was inferred that a saltwater crocodile had killed him, and 2 big ones nearby were shot, and some of his remains were found in their stomachs. I scanned the waters with my strong flashlight that evening, but did not see any eye reflections, but I did refrain from swimming the next morning. Water music scuttled in the Indian Ocean. In the middle of September 2024, while I was on Christmas Island, news came on the modern equivalent of a radio net, a WhatsApp group called Sail to South Africa, that a Waukese Hood 38 named Water Music had lost its spade rudder on the often rough 2,000-mile passage across the middle of the South Indian Ocean between Cocos Keeling and Rodrigues. The crew tried various ways to steer the boat, including floorboards attached to their spinnaker pole and a drogue, without success, and eventually declared a mayday and were picked up by a ship, but not before scuttling the boat. Modern boat designs often use a spade rudder for its improved performance, but the risk is that it would fall off, given that it is only attached via the rudder shaft and its bearings, unlike the skeg-hung rudder of Sea Change or a transom-hung rudder. A similar event happened in May 2025 when a German boat, ironically named Lucky Johnny, a 1986 Furia 37, lost her rudder on the way from New Zealand to Fiji, just 100 miles south of the capital of Suva. A nearby Australian naval ship rescued the 4 crew and rather unusually towed the boat to Suva. Apparently, she was successfully repaired because marine traffic shows her having reached Marsden Cove Marina in New Zealand in mid-November. Cara Moore dismasted off Brazil. I first met a fellow solo circumnavigator, 80-year-old Englishman Bill Horn, on his westerly Ocean Lord 40 at Cocos Keeling in 2024, where we discovered that his lower shrouds were breaking at the tops of the lower swages, something that happened to Sea Change in 2022. So like Sea Change, we assisted them with chain for the long passage to Rodrigues and then on to Mauritius. Bill tore his genoa in a squall on this passage, so in Mauritius I helped him get to a sailmaker and rigger who sorted both problems. He then endured a rough passage from there to South Africa, including sheltering from a strong southerly blow moving up the Mozambique Channel, by anchoring on the tip of Madagascar, where his anchor chain caught on something close to the boat, and before he could do anything about it, ripped off the bow roller and windlass, plus damaged his forestay and furler. With a temporary repair, Bill sailed to Richards Bay for a full repair, but it was too late rounding South Africa to join the rest of us heading up the South Pacific that season. So he returned to Cape Town in November 2025 and sailed to St. Helena. Sadly, that was not the end of his troubles, because on the passage from St. Helena to Fernando de Noronha, the T-ball like this, at the top of the new port lower shroud, broke, and he lost his mast. Like Blue Barrel and Dance Me, he had to cut away his mast, and hence also lost his AIS signals that are transmitted through the VHF antenna on the top of the mast. Hence this is his last position on marine traffic about a month ago. He motored 500 miles to Recife, sleeping little in the absence of AIS, where he is currently sourcing a replacement mast to continue. Bill is a determined adventurer who in his 70s rode a motorbike the length of Africa, so I am confident he will complete his circumnavigation. Coincidentally, I met Tom Collins on Skyfall, his Gunfleet 43, in Cocos Keeling as well. And in Rodrigues, we, Bill is next to me, Tom in the middle, visited their only nature reserve. Tom rounded South Africa about the same time as me, even helping me into a slip at the Zululand Yacht Club in the absence of reverse gear, and joined a hike up Table Mountain, back left here. He left for St. Helena before me, but along the way, one of his lower spreaders broke loose, similarly jeopardizing his mast. But he managed to stabilize it with a line thrown over the other spreader and motored the rest of the way to St. Helena, here anchored on the right. And the missing spreader is evident in this screenshot from a video by Barry Perrins, the old sea dog. Tom hired a rigger from Cape Town to repair the spreader and eventually sailed on to England to complete his circumnavigation. These stories are not meant to put people off sailing oceans, but cruising in small sailboats is not without its hazards. However, I was lucky during my solo circumnavigation not to suffer any of the kinds of misfortune these sailors endured.